On the outskirts of New Orleans, hidden among oak trees draped in green moss, the old manor of Maison de Lune still stands, like a scar carved into time. They say that nearly a century ago, it bore witness to a wedding steeped in blood, when the bride, groom, and every guest perished in a night of unspeakable slaughter. Since then, on every full moon, those who dare to draw near swear they hear the wail of a violin and the echo of laughter spilling from its darkened windows. Inside, the celebration never ended. The bride and groom remain, but their faces are gone, and they are waiting for new guests to arrive. Oh. Lydia was a freelance journalist, known for chasing legends and folklore across the American South. New Orleans had always captivated her with its strange blend of voodoo, Catholicism, and the restless ghosts of its past. Yet among the many chilling tales whispered in the city's streets, none unsettled her quite like the story of the Maison de Lune estate. One night, Lydia slipped away from the French Quarter and drove toward the crumbling manor. The locals' warning still rang in her ears. On the night of the full moon, never go near Maison de Lune. But to Lydia, a taboo was nothing less than an invitation. She stepped out of her car, carrying only a flashlight and her worn notebook. When she pushed open the iron gate, a rush of cold air swept out, laced with the acrid tang of rust and the sweet rot of decayed flowers. She followed the broken stone path, each footstep echoing unnaturally in the silence. The closer she came, the louder her heartbeat seemed to thrum. The manor loomed like a corpse in hibernation, waiting for someone to rouse it. And Lydia, with her insatiable curiosity, had willingly become its caller. The air inside Maison de Lune was thick with dust, yet it echoed with sounds that did not belong to the present. Lydia stepped through the grand hall, where enormous mirrors once gleamed, but now lay dim and clouded. For a fleeting instant, she saw her reflection, blurred, indistinct, her face lacking detail. She staggered back, convincing herself it was only the moonlight distorting her image. Then suddenly, a violin began to play. The melody was distant yet sweet, drawn out like a wedding hymn. Lydia held her breath, listening. The music seemed to pour from the ballroom. When she pushed the door open, the sight before her froze her blood. The room glowed with unnatural light. Chandeliers, heavy with dust, blazed with golden fire. Hundreds of figures in 19th century attire glided across the floor in elegant waltzes, their movements silent, their footsteps soundless. But the horror lay in their faces, blank, featureless, like masks never carved. At the far end of the room stood the bride and groom. The bride in stark white, the groom in jet black. Neither bore a face. Instead, where their features should have been was a dark void, a hollow that pulled at Lydia's gaze like a black hole. Suddenly, an unseen guest pressed a glass into her hand. She flinched, dropping it. The red liquid inside splattered across the floor like blood, but in seconds, it vanished, leaving the stone spotless, as though it had never been. The violin fell silent. In that instant, every faceless gaze in the ballroom turned toward Lydia. Auntie. The ballroom froze. Lydia felt as though she had misstepped in an endless waltz, her body out of place in a ritual that had never stopped. The faceless guests had no eyes, and yet she felt them staring, every inch of her skin prickling under their gaze. The orchestra resumed, but the music was no longer sweet. It was shrill, discordant, a cacophony that rattled her bones. The dancers moved again, but their steps were stiff, jerking like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. One guest drifted toward her, lifting her hand as though inviting her to dance. She recoiled, trembling, but its grip was ice cold, the texture hard as bone. Lydia lifted her eyes, and the blank void where its face should have been split open. From the fissure, dozens of skeletal hands clawed outward, raking at the air. Laughter erupted, rolling across the room from every direction, though she could not tell which mouthless figure it belonged to. In the cracked mirror along the wall, Lydia saw her own reflection, yet her face was gone. In its place stretched a smooth, featureless expanse of white. Panic surged. She stumbled back, but another hand clamped down on her shoulder. The bride, her white gown dragged across the floor, stained with sprawling rust-red streaks. The faceless bride leaned closer, her hollow visage a void that threatened to swallow Lydia whole. The music swelled to a fever pitch. The orchestra, those faceless musicians, revealed their secret horror. Their faces had not been lost. They had been stripped away, dangling like masks from the very instruments they played. Each tortured note bled from human flesh. Lydia tried to scream, but her voice died in her throat. The faceless hand reached up, pressing against her cheek, clammy, wet, and unyielding. The sensation was unbearable, her skin stretching, tugging, ready to be torn away. Nyaha inchadi. The violins shrieked, splintering the air like hundreds of knives clawing at her eardrums. Lydia collapsed onto the ballroom floor, her ears ringing, visions swimming. Yet the scene around her only grew sharper, more grotesque. The faceless guests began to peel away their coverings. One, then another, then dozens. Beneath the white veils were stitched together faces, black threads holding scraps of skin that had never belonged to them. Some faces hung loose, half-attached, exposing the bruised flesh beneath. When they laughed, the sound poured from hollow cavities, echoing like wind howling through crypts. On the banquet table, the towering wedding cake split apart, oozing thick, dark red fluid that stank of rot. Wine glasses filled on their own, brimming with viscous, metallic liquid that sloshed over the rims. Guests raised their cups in unison, toasting, as blood splattered across the white tablecloth. At the center of the room, the bride and groom drifted forward. Their garments, white gown, black suit, fluttered as though gravity no longer applied. They extended their hands toward Lydia, beckoning her to join the wedding. But Lydia knew this was no invitation. It was a sentence. The room convulsed. Doors slammed shut. Candles erupted into flames. Shadows swarmed across the walls like 100 grasping hands. The orchestra changed its tune. No longer a waltz, but the slow, crushing march of a funeral dirge. The violins screamed, no longer instruments, but the cries of souls bound into their strings. A new row of seats appeared, draped in blood-red cloth, reserved for fresh guests. Lydia's breath caught. She saw familiar faces, Marcus, Jonah, stripped of every feature. They sat stiffly, lifeless, hands on their knees, puppets awaiting command. Their flayed faces now hung nearby, ready to be grafted onto the musicians. "No, this isn't real," Lydia whispered, but her voice dissolved beneath the monstrous symphony. The bride raised her hand. Two faceless attendants clamped down on Lydia's shoulders, forcing her to kneel in the center of the hall. A shredded bridal veil dropped over her head, suffocating her in damp darkness. The drumbeat pounded like a colossal heart, pressing the air from her lungs. Then came the final rite, the giving of the mask. The faceless groom approached, holding a human face still dripping fresh blood. The skin mask sagged, eyes clouded, lips pale. Lydia froze in horror as recognition pierced her, Jonah's face. She screamed, thrashing, but the iron-cold hands held her fast. The mask was lowered toward her own, warm blood pattering down her neck. She felt her skin stretch, tug, as though ready to be flayed and replaced. The wedding bells rang 3 times. The whole roared in unison, a ragged chorus chanting, "Welcome the new bride." In that moment of terror, Lydia understood the most dreadful truth. This wedding would never end. It always hungered for more brides, more grooms, more guests. And now it was her turn. The veil smothered Lydia, suffocating her with its weight. Wedding bells tolled, each peal twisting into the shriek of violins scraping bone. Faceless hands clamped down on her shoulders, forcing her head upward. The groom raised Jonah's blood-slicked face, ready to fuse it to the emptiness where her own should be. In that instant, Lydia saw herself reflected in the mirrors lining the hall. Dozens of them. In each one she was someone else, clad in a bridal gown, seated among the faceless orchestra, twirling without features across the dance floor. Each reflection stared back at her with hollow eyes, each future the same, an endless prison with no escape. The guests erupted in laughter. The veil was torn away, and Lydia found herself draped in a white gown. A moment ago she had worn her worn jacket. Now the dress hung heavy, sodden with blood. The former bride was gone. Lydia now stood in her place. The faceless groom clasped her hand. The touch was colder than ice, and with it surged a poison that spread through her veins. Lydia tried to scream, but no voice came. Her lips moved soundlessly, though somewhere nearby violin strings sang, echoing her every motion. The orchestra roared, and the wedding feast resumed. The faceless guests whirled, spinning around Lydia and her new groom. Blood streamed across the marble floor, yet they glided over it as if it were polished glass. Each step left a red imprint that fractured into cracks, spidering through the stone. Through the haze, Lydia clung to a single thought. If I must stay, I will remember. She tried to hold on, to the music, to the stitched faces, to the laughter scraped raw. But memory itself dissolved, slipping away like mist on the wind. She no longer remembered her name. She no longer remembered why she had come. There was only the wedding. There was only the endless dance. Outside, the full moon bled red across Maison de Lune. Inside, the celebration endured, a faceless bride and groom presiding over an orchestra of stolen flesh. Laughter, music, and bells blended into a grotesque symphony. From time to time, neighbors on the outskirts of New Orleans swore they heard it. The distant waltz, the clinking of glasses, the muffled invitations of voices without faces. They barred their doors, avoiding the road that led to the manor. Yet, curiosity always claimed some. Footsteps always wandered too close, and each time, the feast grew louder. The orchestra swelled. Maison de Lune never sleeps. It hungers for guests. And Lydia, forever veiled in her blood-soaked gown, smiles an invisible smile, bound to the faceless wedding symphony, forevermore. Kenna, K. At the edge of a small Midwestern town, the decaying church of St. Aurelia still loomed over a field of wild grass. They said that more than a century ago, the villagers knelt within its frigid nave and struck a covenant with the devil to escape famine. Each soul offered was sealed inside a candle, and the altar became an orchestra of silent screams. Though the church has long been abandoned, whenever the wind cuts across the plain, a faint yellow light still flickers through the shattered windows. And people believe that if a foolish hand ever dares to spark a flame again, the covenant will rise. And whoever lights, it will never leave hope. Ali, wow. Nathaniel pulled his car to a stop along the muddy road, his eyes fixed on the massive shadow rising from the field of wild grass. St. Aurelia Church. The stonework lay in ruins, its roof collapsed in jagged gaps, yet it still radiated a grim, funereal majesty. He opened the door, and the early autumn wind rushed in, cold and damp, carrying the scent of mildew and rust. Nathaniel was a scholar of folk religion. He had heard dozens of rumors about St. Aurelia, where, long ago, the villagers forged a dark covenant in exchange for survival. Most dismissed the stories as superstition, but he did not. In an old library in Chicago, he had unearthed a tattered manuscript that spoke of the breathing candles of this very church. From that moment, obsession clung to him, driving him here. Stepping through the rotted wooden doors, Nathaniel felt at once that the air had thickened, as if he were stepping into the chest cavity of some colossal beast. Each breath grew heavy, each footstep stretched into echoes that refused to die. He swept his flashlight across the nave. There, on the altar, dust lay thick, except for the faint marks of fingers pressed recently into its surface, withdrawn in haste. A gust of wind tore through the church, the doors groaning. And for an instant, Nathaniel was certain he saw a faint glow at the far end of the nave. He blinked, and darkness returned. His heart pounded. Nathaniel drew out his recorder, his voice whispering into it. St. Aurelia, Day 1. I can feel a presence here, and I believe the candles remain, waiting to be lit. Behind him, the darkness seemed to whisper back, soft and sibilant, in a tongue that did not belong to man. No. Nathaniel moved deeper into the nave, his flashlight sweeping across damp, moss-cloaked walls. The air grew heavier, choked with mildew and the acrid tang of old ash. He stopped at the altar, brushing a hand across the thick blanket of dust, then froze. A rustling noise echoed from the far end of the church. His chest tightened. The beam jerked wildly. A shape darted between the ruined pews. Who's there? Nathaniel's voice cracked, trembling against the silence. The shadow suddenly lunged forward. Nathaniel staggered back, pulse hammering, nearly dropping his light. The beam caught a face, haggard, familiar. Eyes bright, hair unkempt, a camera swinging from his neck. Eli? Nathaniel gasped, scarcely believing. The other man stiffened, then let out a shaky laugh. Nathaniel? Christ, I thought you were something else. The tension eased for a heartbeat, though the dread clung stubbornly around them both. Eli Turner, an old friend, once a fellow traveler on field expeditions, was here, inside the rotting shell of St. Aurelia. What are you doing here? Nathaniel asked, voice low. I could ask you the same. Eli raised his camera and snapped a photo. They say this place is haunted, I figured I'd see if my lens could catch anything strange. Didn't expect to find you chasing whatever dark faith you're still obsessed with." Nathaniel didn't answer. He only gestured at the altar. "Do you see it? The wax stains. They've never really gone out." Eli frowned, half skeptical, half uneasy. But before he could reply, a sharp crack rang out, like flame catching a wick. A faint, sickly glow flickered across the altar. A lone candle shivered into flame, though Nathaniel knew he had not touched it. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the ruined walls. Eli lowered his camera, his face gone pale. You see it too?" "Yes," Nathaniel whispered. Wind shrieked through the broken windows, splintering into a chorus of whispers. They swirled around the two men, hundreds of voices rising and falling in a tongue that did not belong to this world. Every syllable scraped at their skin, raising gooseflesh. Eli gripped Nathaniel's shoulder. We should get out, now." But Nathaniel shook his head, his eyes alight with fevered conviction. "No, Eli. This is the proof. The covenant never ended, don't you see? They sealed their souls into these candles." The single flame flared violently, casting light across cracked walls. Within those fissures, Nathaniel thought he saw faces, dozens of them, pressed against the stone, their mouths moving soundlessly. Eli turned away, hands trembling around his camera, no longer daring to press the shutter. Silence thickened. Then came the sound of wax dripping, tick, tick, like blood falling onto the cold stone floor. Eli edged back. "Nathaniel, if you still have any sense left, we should leave before—" His words cut off. The entire nave erupted in light. Dozens of invisible candles roared into flame, their jaundiced glow painting the fractured ceiling. In that glow, shapes coalesced, pale figures lining the central aisle, standing as though in a funeral procession that had never ended. Nathaniel clutched his recorder tight. Eli swallowed hard, eyes wide in horror. Both men knew in that instant they were no longer observers. They had become unwilling guests at a ritual that had never ceased. Now! The jaundiced glow of dozens of candles filled the nave. Their light gave no warmth. Instead, it chilled Nathaniel to the marrow, as though he were standing inside a morgue. Eli gripped his arm tightly, eyes wide, no longer curious but stricken with absolute terror. Along both sides of the aisle, hazy figures began to stir. They had no faces, only man-shaped husks wrapped in wax, chests hollowed inward, arms curled tight like melting effigies. Each movement cracked and splintered like brittle wood. One figure broke away from the front row. The flame on the altar candle bent toward it, as if feeding it with breath. Layer by layer, its skin peeled away, revealing a glistening, pulsing substance beneath. Nathaniel and Eli watched as the thing warped, flesh winding and knotting into the form of a living candle. Its arms stretched into waxen branches split with fissures, and from its mouth spewed molten wax, hissing as it struck the stone floor. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Eli let out a strangled cry, stumbling back against a splintered pew. His camera slipped from his hands and shattered on the stone, forgotten. The flesh candle flared, a crimson flame erupting from its brow. Its light made the other figures quiver in unison, as though awaiting command. From its warped body came a groan, layered, 100 voices weeping at once from a single throat. "Oh God, oh God," Eli whispered, clutching Nathaniel's shoulder. But Nathaniel could not look away. Terror bound him, yet some dreadful fascination held him still. He listened and realized the groaning carried words. Not random sounds, but names. The names of Saint Aurelia's villagers, one by one, called from the dark. Another candle on the altar flared to life. A second figure stepped free, its skin cracking, wax pouring down its body. The stench of burning flesh rolled through the nave. Eli gagged, pressing his hand to his mouth to keep from vomiting. The whispers swelled, clearer now, their chant unmistakable. More to be lit. New blood for the light. Nathaniel fumbled for his notebook, scrawling frantic notes with a trembling hand. Eli snatched at it, hissing, "You're insane. This isn't something to record, it's something to escape." But before their argument could rise, the two flesh candles lurched forward. Beneath their feet, wax sizzled like acid, eating through the flagstones. A droplet spattered onto a fallen pew. Within seconds, the wood sagged into ash. "Run!" Eli screamed. They bolted down the narrow aisle, the sickly glow dogging their steps. Nathaniel slammed into a crumbling wall, his hand striking a small wooden door. Without a thought, he shoved it open. Both men tumbled inside and wrenched it shut behind them. The small chamber reeked of scorched wax, heavier than the air outside. Their breaths rasped in their throats, seared as though they had swallowed fire. Nathaniel's flashlight swept the room, then froze. Before them lay a circle of candles, dozens of them, encircling a stone altar. But these were no wax tapers. Each was a human finger, bone and flesh fused together, fingertips burning with steady red flame. Eli broke into sobs, voice trembling. "Nathaniel, this isn't a covenant. This is hell." Outside, fists pounded the door. The flesh candles had found them. The flames atop the altar suddenly roared skyward, illuminating ancient sigils carved into the walls, a curse that had never been broken. And in that moment, Nathaniel understood. They had not stumbled upon a relic. They had awakened a covenant that promised no escape. Yee! Footsteps thundered through the darkened church. Nathaniel dragged Eli forward, breath ragged, the stench of burning wax clinging thick in the air. Behind them, the wax figures dragged themselves across the floor, hissing softly like candles cracking as they melted. They burst into the confessional, only to see the walls splitting, wax seeping through like congealed blood. A hand seized Eli's shoulder. Nathaniel swung his flashlight like a club, shattering it, and pulled his friend onward. The nave yawned open before them, and the scene had changed. Every pew was filled with waxen shapes, all heads turned toward the altar. Upon it stood a single colossal candle, burning crimson, its light bleeding across the stone like liquid fire. Before it, a melting priest shape preached, voice booming against the fractured walls. The covenant has never ended. The flame must be fed with souls. The heat scorched their skin raw. The congregation of candles began to rise, staggering forward, limbs splitting, their bodies dripping foul black resin. Nathaniel clenched the drawings in his hand. The ink had bled scarlet, revealing a sigil of a broken candle beneath the altar. His mind reeled with clarity. The only escape was to shatter the seal. "The crypt beneath the altar!" he shouted, dragging Eli through the swaying throng. The wax creatures grasped at them, shells splitting, oozing a stench of rot and ash. At the altar's base, Nathaniel's palm found a hollowed stone. He pressed hard. The floor trembled, splitting wide to reveal a spiral staircase plunging into the depths. The priest's shape roared. From the great red candle lashed tendrils of molten wax, cracking down like whips, searing the air inches from their heads. Without hesitation, Nathaniel and Eli hurled themselves down the stairwell, heat pursuing like a living tide. Darkness thickened around them until, at the bottom, a monolithic stone door loomed. Carved upon its surface was the image of an inverted burning candle. From its fissures seeped the sound of countless voices, whispering, sobbing, cursing, begging. The door groaned as it began to open. A cold wind surged through, snuffing out the light behind them. Nathaniel felt the pull of inevitability. Beyond this threshold lay the true heart of Saint Aurelia, where the fate of the Covenant, sealed for centuries, would finally be decided. Pai, inscribed. The stone door shuddered open, and darkness surged out like a flood of ice. Nathaniel and Eli stepped inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Beneath their feet, the floor was split with jagged fissures, from which oozed thick, red wax, like blood boiled into liquid. At the chamber's center rose a colossal candle, vast as an ancient tree. Its flame burned crimson, casting a sickly glow across the cavern. Around its waxen trunk were fused human forms, mouths frozen open, eyes dripping like molten wax, their bodies rigid yet trembling as though still alive. From them came low, overlapping moans, a grotesque chorus of suffering. Eli staggered back, voice trembling. Nathaniel clutched the drawing, the sigil of the broken candle glowing like a wound. He understood. This was the root of the Covenant. The blood candle, devouring the villagers' souls to fuel the sect's unholy power. As long as it burned, the ritual would never end. "We have to extinguish it," Nathaniel whispered, though his breath shook with fear. They stepped forward, but the priest's voice echoed from every wall, thick and dripping like wax. "None shall break the covenant. This flame is your blood." The monstrous candle flared, tendrils of red wax uncoiling and lashing down. They wrapped around Eli's legs, dragging him toward the trunk. He screamed, thrashing, but the wax was as unyielding as iron chains. Nathaniel lunged, pulling desperately, but the candle clutched tighter, hungrier. "Go!" Eli shouted, eyes wild with both terror and resolve. "You have to destroy it, even if I don't make it." Nathaniel shook his head, tears brimming, but Eli shoved him hard toward the flame. In that instant, Nathaniel understood. Only a final sacrifice could end it. Eli lifted his face, his eyes gleaming in the hellish red light. "End it." And then he let go, surrendering himself to the candle. His body was swallowed whole, the flame surging higher with a shriek that rattled the earth. The chamber convulsed. Nathaniel seized the moment. He tore the last relic from his pack, a flask of sacred oil scavenged from the archives, and hurled it into the heart of the fire. A deafening roar split the air. The blood candle screamed, fissures ripping through its body as imprisoned souls burst free, wailing in a torrent of cold wind. The light collapsed into itself, plunging the cavern into utter blackness. When Nathaniel awoke, he lay among the rubble, outside Saint Aurelia. The night sky loomed above, moonless, silent. No Eli, no moans, only the crushing stillness of a grave. He staggered to his feet, his hands caked in hardened wax, a mark that would never fade. The crypt, the candle, all gone, along with Eli. But deep within the silence, he caught the faintest whisper riding the wind. The covenant is not finished. Nathaniel shivered. Somewhere, in the shadows of Appalachia, the blood flame still waited for another sacrifice to awaken it once more. Pixie. In an isolated town of the American South, a fanatical religious community lived by the pages of a single scripture they believed to be divine. But the holy book had warped, its letters twisting like flesh and blood. Each time it was read aloud, it brought not salvation but horror. Joints sprouting from the wrong places, skin rotting away, eyes bulging from their sockets. And when the moon shone down on the rotting church, the grotesque truth was revealed. Their God was no deity at all, but an ancient parasite, feeding through every prayer, waiting to claim as its next host anyone foolish enough to draw near. Jonah Lawson drove along the dirt-red road, flanked on both sides by shadowed swamplands where daylight barely slipped through the trees. The silence was so heavy that the faintest sound, the fall of a leaf, the drone of an insect, echoed like a drum inside his chest. He had come here to investigate a rare religious community, whispered about in chilling rumors, an isolated town, bizarre rituals, and strange bodily deformities that plagued its believers. The village emerged like something abandoned by time. Weather-beaten wooden houses leaned under peeling paint, their windows coated with layers of grime. The people watched him pass with hollowed, stone-worn faces, their voices coarse as if scraped down to rock. Jonah felt as though he had crossed into another world, one where ordinary rules no longer applied. At the town's center stood the old church, its structure corroded from within. The wooden doors hung half open, leaking faint light, and the stench of melted wax mixed with something rancid and decaying. Jonah stepped inside, heart pounding. In the gloom, splintered pews lined the floor like broken teeth. The altar was crusted with dust and hardened wax, and yet, lying upon it, rested the community's only surviving Bible. Inside, a cluster of worshippers knelt on the floor, murmuring prayers. Jonah's breath caught when he noticed. Their skin split into jagged cracks, new joints bulging at unnatural angles, some eyes swelling grotesquely from their sockets. Yet, none of them cried out. Their voices droned on, steady, reverent. Each verse echoed through the church like invisible blades, slicing into flesh, and the convulsions of their bodies became part of the chant. Jonah staggered back, horrified. These mutations were not accidents, not illness. They were the direct consequence of the scripture itself. Every word recited was a knife, every prayer an incision. To the townsfolk, it was a miracle of God. But to Jonah, it was something else. A parasitic force, ancient and unholy, twisting bodies through its scripture. His flashlight caught the Bible on the altar. The letters writhed across the page, trembling and curling like veins under the skin, the sheen of dried blood clinging to the ink. A chill surged down his spine. He realized he stood in the heart of a grotesque covenant, an ancient pact festering behind this community's faith. Jonah inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. But his pulse hammered on, a frantic reminder. He had crossed into the territory of something older than God. where scripture was not salvation but infection. And he knew, one wrong move, one stray syllable uttered aloud, and he too could be claimed as the next vessel, doomed. Jonah pressed himself into a shadowed corner of the church, eyes fixed on the preacher holding the tattered Bible. Its rough, blistered pages glimmered with a sickly red glow from the wax. The preacher's raspy voice rose and fell, merging with the faint groans of the kneeling worshippers, creating a grotesque, almost symphonic chant. A woman kneeling near the altar suddenly convulsed. The skin on her arm split open, revealing dark, raw flesh beneath. Jonah's heartbeat spiked. Before he could make sense of it, an old man beside him whispered, "Do not fear, it is the blessing of the Lord." But Jonah could not look away. With each verse, joints twisted, ribs stretched in unnatural ways, eyes bulged or swelled grotesquely, their bodies warped, yet their voices droned on. No screams, no pleas. Sweat and congealed blood mingled with the reek of rot, thickening the air into something suffocating. A moment later, the preacher turned toward Jonah, his eyes glinting with fervor. "You wish to hear as well, don't you? You want to understand the power of God." His tone rasped and cracked, but each word carried a supernatural weight, pulling Jonah in. Jonah trembled, but could not step back. He saw the writing on the page shift, the letters writhed like snakes slithering across the parchment. As the preacher read on, Jonah's body burned. His hands went numb, as though something inside was clawing for release. He stumbled back, but the floorboards quivered, and the congregation crept closer in unison. Their groans merged with the preacher's chant, the rhythm pounding against Jonah's skull. A strange sensation spread through him. His skin prickled, then turned numb. Jonah looked down. His knuckles twitched. His thumbs seemed to swell and split from his hand, as if a new joint were forming. In a heartbeat, he felt something alien threading through his veins. It wasn't pain. It was worse. A vile vitality taking root inside him. In the wavering glow, Jonah saw the others, deformed yet upright, mouths reciting scripture, eyes gleaming with twisted ecstasy. He realized this Bible was no vessel of salvation but a tool, an ancient parasite invading flesh, word by word, prayer by prayer. Sweat and blood dripped from his brow as he steadied himself. He knew one moment of weakness, one slip into the rhythm of those words, and he would no longer be human. In the chorus of groans and the preacher's rasping voice, Jonah understood. If he wished to survive, he would have to trace this rotten scripture back to its root. But here, every step was peril, every breath a potential offering to the ancient power that already ruled the faithful. Shah. Jonah could retreat no further. The stench of rot, dried blood, and burning wax pressed against his lungs, choking him. Each step seemed to sink into the rotting wooden floor, while the groans of the deformed worshippers merged with the scripture, a grotesque chorus not meant for the living. He noticed a small trapdoor beneath the altar. One brick was loose, revealing faint light spilling from below. On its surface, words had been carved, glowing faintly red like clotted blood. Jonah inhaled sharply, his trembling hand pushing the hatch open. A rush of cold air escaped, thick with decay. Yet underneath it, something pulsed with life. Descending, Jonah saw them. Countless half-rotten corpses still moving, their flesh sloughing away in wet strips. Eyes bulged from sockets, joints had sprouted extra hinges, skin peeled in ragged patches. A suffocating dread weighed down on his spirit. This was not illness, not ritual, but the direct handiwork of the ancient parasite. He staggered back, but the figures advanced slowly. Their whispers invaded his head. The scripture wasn't just on paper. It lived across their skin, etched into blood and bone, spreading through every breath. Each word was a root piercing into Jonah's flesh, making his skin sting, his joints ache, his blood clot beneath the surface. Jonah quivered, but forced himself to hide his fear. Observing closely, he realized these abominations retained a twisted consciousness. They murmured verses, howling with a mix of agony and ecstasy, eyes lit with an unnatural black glow. The parasite used the holy text as a tool of hypnosis, turning every believer into a living host, sustaining its existence through generations. Above, he heard the creak of collapsing boards, the preacher and his flock preparing the nightly ritual. Jonah knew this would be greater than anything before, something meant to unleash the parasite across the entire town. He had to escape, but every step risked attack. The corpses seemed to track him, ready to pounce at the slightest movement. He slipped deeper into the cellar and discovered a storeroom filled with old scripture pages. Many were caked with dried slime, their letters writhing faintly as though alive. Jonah flipped one page and felt a stabbing under his skin, as if the words themselves were burrowing into him. The verses crawled, hissing against the paper, and his heart clenched with dread. This parasite controlled everything through the book, through each syllable spoken aloud. Suddenly, a corpse reached out and touched his shoulder. Jonah flinched, blood rushing to his face. In a blink, the creature pulled back, but in his mind echoed a hideous moan, rotting scripture threading itself through his thoughts, verse by verse. He swallowed hard. Unless he destroyed the root of this corrupted Bible, the entire town and himself would be consumed as hosts. He froze in the cellar, eyes fixed on the stairway above. The ritual was about to begin. The faithful still believed this was a miracle. But Jonah knew the truth. The miracle was rotten from the inside out. If he did not act now, the parasite would spread unchecked, reshaping every living body into its brood. Below, the corpses moaned, the scriptures writhed, and Jonah understood. There was only one path left, to face the source of the rotting covenant directly, or die as its next vessel. No. Oh no. Jonah crept up from the cellar, every step echoing inside the decaying church. Above, enormous crimson candles bled their light into the suffocating air. The congregation was gathered, kneeling, their eyes gleaming with grotesque rapture as they muttered scripture under their breath. The preacher stood at the pulpit, his ragged voice booming. "Tonight, the Lord will bless us, through every soul offered." As his words fell, a slick tide of red wax oozed from the altar, curling around the worshippers' feet. Their skin shriveled, their limbs sprouted extra joints, eyes bulged from sockets, yet their mouths kept chanting, their voices unwavering, as though hypnotized. Jonah crouched in the shadows, sweat soaking his brow. He realized the parasite was no longer confined to their flesh. It saturated the entire church, seeping into the very air, lacing itself into every breath, every heartbeat. A chill swept through him as his own skin prickled, muscles tightening painfully. One worshipper staggered toward him, brushing a hand across Jonah's shoulder. Instantly his joints twitched, his skin swelled, nerves flared with agony as though something inside was splitting him apart. The groans of the congregation merged with scripture, pounding against his skull, dragging him to the brink of panic. The preacher sneered, his eyes blazing crimson. "You are the chosen. You shall become the final vessel to complete the covenant." Jonah knew then there was no turning back. They bound him to the altar, where beneath the wood and stone pulsed a massive mass of slime. Covered in weeping eyes and moaning mouths, its body throbbing in rhythm with the recited verses. Each word clung to Jonah's flesh, burrowing into bone, searing his skin, knotting his limbs into grotesque shapes. Blood thickened beneath his skin, bones strained as though sprouting anew. He screamed, yet consciousness lingered, long enough to understand that the parasite did not want his death. It wanted his body, alive, to be the seed for its spread. In one desperate, lucid moment, Jonah looked upon the deformed husks surrounding him, their chanting rattling in his ears. He made his choice. Straining against the ropes, he toppled a great candle, spilling fire onto the writhing red wax below. Flames roared upward, shrieks of scripture twisting into a chorus of agony as the entire church convulsed. The blaze consumed everything. Smoke choked the air. The warped faithful flailed in torment before collapsing into ash. Jonah crumpled, the stench of burning flesh filling his lungs as the last flame sputtered and darkness swallowed the room. But from within the ashes, a faint whisper lingered. The covenant is not broken. A warning that the parasite had not been destroyed, only silenced. For now. Nay. Ash choked the air, the acrid stench of smoke clawing into Jonah's lungs. He lay face down on the damp earth, sweat mixing with soot, hands trembling. The inferno had gutted most of the church, but the whispers lingered, soft and relentless, threading through his mind. The twisted husks of the faithful had withered in the blaze, yet Jonah knew the parasite was not destroyed. It had seeped into the ashes, into the half-burnt scriptures, waiting for a chance to bloom again. A prickling numbness spread through his body, skin cracking dry, limbs curling tight, heart hammering against his ribs. Every breath was a reminder that his life was being gnawed away from within. Forcing himself upright, Jonah fixed his gaze on the fragments of charred scripture drifting in the pale moonlight. His act had stopped a great ritual, sparing what remained of the town, but the cost was unbearable. Part of him was already infected, his hands roughened, bone pushing unnaturally against skin. He whispered to himself, as long as I breathe, as long as I remain myself, I must keep it from spreading. Yet, even in that rare silence, a long, worming murmur seeped out of the ashes. Rotted verses, writhing, curling into his ears like a hymn of horror. The flames had died, but the parasite endured. In dust, in paper, in every grain of ash. It had not been destroyed, only waiting for another body to claim. Jonah stumbled out of the ruin, his feet sinking into the wet soil, moonlight glinting on drifting motes of ash. The town was silent, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew the parasite was still watching, still threading through every shadow. He was the only survivor, but also a carrier, marked by the covenant scar. The others were gone. The church lay in smoldering ruin. Jonah stood amidst the wreckage, staring up at the moon, crushed by a loneliness deeper than death. His survival was a hollow victory, haunted by whispers that refused to fade. He closed his eyes as pain lanced through his veins. He had lived, but part of him was forever altered, scarred by the parasite's touch. And in the southern night, the whisper of the rotten scripture lingered, faint, ceaseless, a warning that the covenant had never truly ended. Wah!